Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of the Lifting the Veil podcast with your host, myself, Adrienne Lopez, the Integrative Healing Coach. Thanks for joining me for soul healing conversations, guests, and topics that support you in unveiling the true nature of your consciousness so you can embrace your destiny and not suffer your fate. If you hear something here today that resonates with you, please don't forget to like, share, comment, and or subscribe, as it really helps support the growth and reach of this podcast by increasing listenership, which makes this whole endeavor possible. In the meantime, please sit back, relax, and get ready for my interview with my special guest this week, Maitreya Wolf, who is a soul mentor, wisdom teacher, and musician, sharing about her unique brand of magic and medicine. We'll get started in just a minute.
Interesting. Okay. This is me letting go of things. What today is going to do. Let go of things. Sunayawa sunara aya numana heya. Sunayawa sunara aya numana. Sunayawa sunara aya numana heya. Sunayawa sunara aya numana. Sunayawa una he sanana he. Sunayawa kuna kairi nama. Sunayawa huna he sanana he. Sunayawa kuna kairi. Sunayawa huna he. Sunayawa sunara aya numana heya. Sunayawa sunara aya numana. Sunayawa sunara aya numana heya. Sunayawa sunara aya numana. Sunayawa huna he sanana he. Sunayawa kuna kairi nama. Sunayawa huna he sanana he. Sunayawa kuna kairi. Sunayawa huna he. Sunayawa suna anaya na he na he na. Sunayawa suna an neya neya. Sunayawa suna an neya na he na he na. Sunayawa suna an neya neya. Sunayawa huna he sanana he. Sunayawa kuna kairi nama. Sunayawa huna he sanana he. Sunayawa kuna kairi. Sunayawa huna he.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that medicine song with us today. That's a perfect way to begin today's interview with Maitreya Wolf. I'm so glad that you were able to join me. Thank you so much for making time to be here and share your wisdom and your medicine of song and so many other forms that I just want to tell the audience a little bit about before we dig into our official conversation or interview. So I know that it's here somewhere because I just put it here. So sorry for the
technology has a lot of personality today.
Yes, it sure does. We had our our opportunity to face that. So, Maitreya Wolf is a wisdom teacher, a soul mentor, musician, as you just heard, a tarot reader, a wedding officiant, a writer, a dancer whose life and work is devoted to awakening, healing, and the liberation of humanity and the earth. Through her soul power mentoring work, she supports people in learning how to transform pain into power through deep counsel, the cultivation of practical skills, earth-based mystical practice, and entheogenic journey work. So, so I think I'll leave it to there. Today we'll have an opportunity to talk about the work that you do and the medicine you bring to the earth and the people. So I'm super delighted that we have this space today to connect.
It's an honor to be here. Thank you for welcoming me into the creation of your heart.
Yes, my pleasure. So, yes. So I asked you if you had wanted to share some of your singing magic with us, which you just did. And it's just so powerful, right? That ability to move energy and give sound to all of the invisible places and spaces and resources that are available to us. And I'm curious just to know what was that chant from or that prayer from, and what special meaning does it have?
That chant I learned from at a distance from a woman whose work I appreciate. It's by a trio called Tribe of Love, and it
Mm,
is their prayer to the seed of life. And
mm.
they're they are entheogenic medicine practitioners, and they take people on retreats, and they do sound-based healing work out of New York.
Oh, wow.
So I learned it with the blessing of one of the women of that group, the woman who had written it.
Oh, it's very moving.
Yeah, it's a really nourishing piece.
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely. And I forget how nourishing it is to hear sound and music. Um, so thank you. And I wanted to come back to this term before I forget how to say it. Entheogenic, I believe, in medicine or journey work. Can you tell us a little bit?
Entheogenic.
Oh, entheo.
Entheo,
Yes.
yeah, entheogenic work.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about what that is and um, how that shows up for you and your work?
Yeah, absolutely. So entheogenic is a word that denotes to be in spirit. Theo is the Latin word for God,
Mhm.
Godhead, the
Yeah.
God principle, the principle of the divine, not the God, Catholic God, but the principle of the divine in the Latin language. And entheogenic means to be in the divine. And it's a different word for psychedelic. Psychedelic essentially points to being in the psyche. And I relate to medicine work, the imbibing of substances in a ritual container with a sacred intent, or with an intent towards healing and deep work, not just a wahoo, let's go there intent.
Yeah.
Um, I relate to that as a movement towards the mystery for gnosis, for the cultivation of gnosis in the soul, because I relate to life as an evolutionary process. I relate to the human experience as a phenomenological process on the soul's evolutionary journey from source through differentiation to source. And I look at the entheogens that are here in the world with us, things like psilocybin and ayahuasca and San Pedro and 5-MeO and the other, the, the friends, the catalysts, the supporters. I look at those ones as helpers along the way. And that if we come into good relationship with them, if we come into disciplined and self-responsible and socially responsible relationship with them, then we have the opportunity to catalyze and further our soul's evolution at an incredible rate. And so I work with that in my own practice. I do that work with people.
I am so fascinated by this whole conversation. First of all, let me just tell you this. I know that there's been a huge attention and push to plant medicines and ayahuasca and all of this good stuff. And I personally have not been moved to work directly with these plant medicines. I don't have, any judgment against people that do at all. Everyone has their journey, and some people require or request the help of these plants or this medicine. And my only concern is the integration of the process, like the blowing into consciousness, right? And then coming back out, and then not being able to integrate the process or not being able to maintain that level of consciousness. And so, yeah, the part of my soul I find is leaning into safety and support and right relationship, as you mentioned. I think is super important to me. It feels important to me. And so I really appreciate the lens of the divine that you're sharing. And as you were speaking, it reminds me of this quote from the Rig Veda. I don't know if you know it, about the plants. Yeah?
Go ahead. What is it?
Oh, do you know it?
I know what the Rig Veda is, but
Oh no, the chapter about the plants that were sent to Earth to be our guide and to be our protector, and also to remind us of our own nature
remind us of our true nature. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, when we forget.
Yeah. Well, the big piece, like you mentioned, is being able to integrate the experience in your daily life. Like I started my journey with psychedelics when I was 15 because I'm just naturally a very soul-oriented, very earth-oriented person.
Yeah.
And I was going through my high school experience and I was just like, this is bullshit. I don't want to do this.
Yeah.
And I discovered LSD. And when I discovered LSD, I was like, okay, this feels real. I want to do this. And I found my way into that realm. And it was gorgeous. It was this vast, expansive, transformational opening and awakening and all these things, but there was no containment for it. I was not in a space, I'm not in a tribal culture that can contain this sort of thing. I was not in an initiatory context inside of a intact culture that could contain this kind of awakening. I was just a kid, like, default world is bullshit. I'm going for something more magical, more profound, and more real. This is what I found, and this is where I'm going. And it led to serious issues for me. It led to what you're speaking to, an inability to bridge the experience and to come back and to relate on a daily level. So for many years, I was very distinctly not going to go there. And then when I first started to see the ayahuasca, um, what would you call it? The ayahuasca trend start to come up about 15 years ago, I was really, really skeptical of it because I saw so many people going to Peru for these big long retreats or going to these big immersions and coming out and being just as dysfunctional as they were before they went in, but a little more sparkly and a lot more blown out by it. And I was like, this isn't healthy, this isn't useful, this isn't beneficial. And I think it should be what you do after you've done what you can do on your own. And that's the place that I've gotten to in my own life, is a really deep understanding that the medicine doesn't heal you. The medicine doesn't finish or fix anything for you. The medicine is like the tarot. It's like anything that comes from the mystery. It's this opening into a new perspective. It's an opening into a new orientation. It's an opening to a path to power. It can accelerate healing, but only if you're already on the path. It can accelerate awakening only if you're already on the path. If you're not already in that cultivation, it could do you a lot of damage. If you go to the medicine as the thing with the answer, it's likely to cause more confusion and cause more distortion and cause more disruption on your path, instead of going here and saying, I recently did a high dose ceremony. It was my second one this year because I parted from my beloved about 6 weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
And after a month of deep grieving and deep process and deep integration, I was like, okay, it is very clearly time for a journey. So I created a 3-day ritual for myself. And in the middle of that 3-day ritual, I did a high dose ceremony on a riverbank on my friend's land, very contained. I was by myself, but I can do that because I'm used to that. And I gave myself entirely to this process. And I have been in the integration process ever since. Like this morning in my meditation, I was sitting with everything that I learned, everything that I experienced, everything that happened in that day, tending it in my body, smoothing it into my system, rooting it into my earth roots, just bringing it in, bringing it in, bringing it in, and opening the teachings more and more and more. And this is the kind of work that I do with my students, because I don't lead with the entheogenic work with them. I don't say like, this is our starting point. I say, when we get here, when we do this amplification and this deepening of our practice, then we're going to spend the next month, the next 2 months, the next 3 months working with everything that we've learned inside of that container, integrating all of those teachings into your worldview, your lens, your way of orienting towards life, and your practical daily movements. If you're being reoriented from fear to love, how does that look when you're driving, when you're at the grocery store, when you're having a difficult conversation, when you're afraid or lonely at night? How does this look on a very practical level? Because, a lot of times we've got a very up and out society where everybody's trying to escape into feeling better all the time, where we're not dealing with our grief and our fear and our pain and our rage because there's no social context for holding that. So part of the shadow side of the medicine realm and the resurgence to the medicine realm is that it's another way for people to go up and out.
Check out, yeah.
Yeah, and what needs to happen is that you come down and in. Come down and in. Be here. Be in the body. Be in the roots. Be in your soul. Be present. Use this expansion. Be in this expansion, but be right here in your daily life while you do it. That's integration. That's awakening. That's healing. That's liberation.
Amen. A woman too. I love that. I love that so much. It resonates with me because today I was just writing. I like to write a lot, and it's just a way for me to process what's ever coming up in me. And I was speaking to myself about the same topic about planting ourselves in the soil of our soul. And if we're not deeply planted in our own soul, there's no way that we can effectively or in any long-term impactful way transform the world around us. And there's this, as you were saying, up and out society, like wanting to fix the world and fix this problem and, fight for this right. And so the real revolution or evolution that's happening is this beautiful process of allowing ourselves to turn in and tend to our own pain and grief, as you mentioned. And so this brings me to ask you about, two things, and you can make them in your own,
Choose your adventure.
Yes, choose your adventure, exactly. One is this deep work that's really been showing up in my life all over the place is the myth of Inanna or Ishtar, or all of the variations of the goddess, and the underworld. That's one. And two, this idea of that we've lost in our culture, in our modern day culture, of initiation and ritual, that allows us to go into these other realms, that are deeply needed for us, like to grow and to be fully embodied and conscious.
Got it. So those are a nested pair, these two
Yes.
questions. And
Yes, they are.
to answer this question, let me tell you a story.
Okay, I love stories.
So when I was 29, I went through what became the definitive trauma of my adult life. And it was a spectacular implosion of absolutely every facet of my life. My career, my relationships, my community, my martial arts community, my home. I lost everything. I lost everything in this event, and I got blamed by most of the people around me for everything that happened. And I was young, and I was not cultivated or cooked as a person. So I took that blame into the inner wound of there's something wrong with me. I just took the blame that this is all my fault and look at how awful I am. I failed.
Yeah.
And so that was dreadful, of course.
Yeah.
And,
Just the loss alone.
just the loss
Yeah.
alone, just the incredible loss that I had gone through, let alone everything on top of it, my career, my home, my body was not well. It was really severe. It was really severe. And about 2 months later, after everything, like after the tower, the lightning had struck, everything's burned to the ground, it's all dust and rubble now. About 2 months after everything had settled out, I was sitting there talking with somebody I had just met, and he said, "Well, what's your name?" I said, "Ishtar." And he said, "Say that again." And I said, Ishtar. And he's like, "Oh, that's interesting. I never heard that before. What does that mean?" I said, "Well, it's the name of a goddess." He's like, "Oh, cool. Okay." Blah, 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 blah. And he goes on, and I'm internally just like, what the fuck? That was not my name. That was not my name. That was not my name. I had never said that word before. I had seen it once before. In a deck of cards, there was an artist who passed recently, but in the 80s and 90s, this woman, Susan Staden Bouyer, did these incredible, incredible artwork. And they've made all kinds of stuff out of her art since she was alive, and also since she's passed. But one of the things that was made was this deck of goddess cards. And one of the goddess cards was Ishtar, and I had pulled that card out of the deck, a few days prior to meeting this guy. And then I told him my name was Ishtar. And when I finished that conversation, rode home on my bike and started looking up Ishtar, because I was like, what the fuck did I
You're
just
like, who am I? Yeah.
what the hell did I just do? And so I go and I look up Ishtar, and I'm learning about Ishtar and all this other stuff. And I was like, oh, this is fascinating, because Ishtar is the same goddess as Inanna. Ishtar was the pastoral tribal name for this creator goddess, the queen of heaven and earth, who's an embodiment of Venus. And in the cities of Sumer and Babylon, her name was Inanna. So they're the same being, called by different names by different people, oriented to different ways of living. And so I went and learned about Ishtar, and Ishtar, Inanna's primary myth, is the myth of her descent to the underworld. So Ishtar is the queen of heaven and earth. She has been created. She hasn't been born. She hasn't grown through her own life. She's been created, and she's created as the queen of heaven and earth. So she's created in perfection. She's just, everything is awesome. everything is just like sunlight and birds singing and sweet fruit and richness and bounty and loveliness. Everything is just awesome for her. But she knows that something is not complete. There's something missing. And she doesn't necessarily know what she is, but she starts to get an idea that it has something to do with her sister Ereshkigal, who was also divinely created. She's just an emergent force. And Ereshkigal is the complement, or you could say the antithesis, the other end of the spectrum from Ishtar is Ereshkigal. She's the queen of the underworld. She's the queen of the dead. She's the queen of hell. She's the queen of darkness. And so Ishtar starts to get this idea that, like, I have to go see my sister. They've never met. I have to go see my sister. I know that her consort just died. I'll go to see Ereshkigal. I'll visit her for the funeral. So there's this whole story that Ishtar slowly removes herself from all of her worldly stations. She tells her servant Ninshubur, I'm going to see my sister. If I don't return in 3 days, set up a lament for me and get my fathers, Enki and Enlil, to come for me. So she goes to the underworld, and she gets to the gates of the underworld, and the guard says, what are you doing here? And she says, I want to go see Ereshkigal. And the guard says, you can't come in, you're not dead. This is where the dead go. That's the only people who come through this gate. And she says, well, go ask Ereshkigal if I can come. So he goes and asks, and Ereshkigal says, yes, she can come, but she can come like everybody comes. She comes through the gates. So she goes through the gates, and she's all arrayed in her finery. And at each gate, some piece is taken away. Her crown, her necklace, her earrings, her belt, her shoes, her dress. Everything is taken from her at each gate until she gets to Ereshkigal, and Ereshkigal kills her, hangs her on a hook on the wall, and says, well, that's what happens when you come to the underworld, you die. And so Ninshubur sets up the lament. The fathers come to retrieve her. Ereshkigal says she can go, but somebody will have to come back in her place. It's this whole big, long, epic story. And essentially what it's talking about at the most basic level is how when we endeavor to become integrated and whole as souls, we must strip off all illusions of who we are. Every piece of finery that Ishtar has lost is something that was endowed upon her. It's not necessarily something that she earned through her own realization as a being. It's something that she was given. It's something that she was made with. And at each gate, it's stripped away from her because it doesn't actually have gravity in relation to who she is. It's not actually a part of who she is. It's just something that she's got that bolsters this idea of her as queen of heaven and earth, but she's not fully occupying it. She's not fully embodied in it. It's not authentically hers.
Yeah,
So
it's like the trappings of the world, all the trappings of the world.
exactly. And then when she's dead down there, she's gotten to that place of total annihilation, which we all come to at some point. And it's like, okay, you can go back, but you have to go back yourself. You have to walk through every gate. And on her way back through the gates, she claims back everything that she lost. And you could say each gate is a trial of the soul. You could say each gate is an initiatory passage where she earns back through her own true awareness, through her own endeavor, through the ripening of her own soul on her own terms. She gains back these expressions of her power as a being, so that when she emerges again and she's got her crown, her jewels, her dress, her belt, her shoes, her whatever, when she's got all of this stuff, she's actually fully embodied as this thing that she is, as this being that she is, which just happens to be the queen of heaven and earth, but it could be anyone.
Yeah, it's the principle of life, right?
The principle of life is that you actually embody what you are and who you are through the endeavor of your own will and intention, that you fully show up for your life, that you fully participate, that you meet your challenges as evolutionary catalysts. And this is what the initiatory principle is. And in my work with people, with my students, one of the principles that I'm consistently teaching about, that we're consistently cultivating, is the initiatory lens. Cultivating the initiatory lens, cultivating initiatory consciousness, so that you relate to everything that happens in the course of your life as fuel for your evolutionary fire, so that you don't get tangled and bogged down in the interpersonal, in the he said, she said, in the victim consciousness, in the what happened to me, in the I got or I didn't get what I wanted or didn't want. You go farther than that. You go deeper. You relate to everything. You relate to the beauty. You relate to the challenge. You relate to it all as a catalyst for evolution.
I love that. I love the way that you've explained that, and the relationship to the initiatory lens, because I know from working with people and from my own evolutionary process, it's so easy to get stuck in the victim and the hurt and the pain and the enemy images, um, and then it's like, oh, I get to choose how to look at my life, either as the role, like Anana, who was the queen of heaven, and she had all these trappings, but they weren't truly hers. They were just given to her. And this other lens of the soul, like I claim these, not because somebody gave them to me, but because they're a true expression of my heart and my soul. And that is a powerful way of having authority and permission to land home, like boom, like like a fully drop in.
Yeah.
So yeah, thank you for sharing that. Go ahead.
Yeah, well, it was fascinating coming back to the story that started it all, that I told this person my name was Ishtar because I had no relationship to the initiatory process at
At the
that point
time.
in my life, like zero, zero. So this old power, the creature that Ishtar is, this old power came through to me in a moment when I was in desperate need. I was completely destroyed. I was suicidal at that point in my life. And very close to being, going off the deep end in all kinds of ways. And this old power came in and was like, here, this is a life-giving way to relate to this experience. This is a life-giving lens for this experience. This is a path to power. You're going to have to walk it yourself. I had to learn it myself. I had to decipher it myself. I had to wake up into it and let it heal me by walking me through a fire that I walked through for years. I walked through the initiatory fire of my life for years and years and years. But she supported me. Other things came to support me. Old powers continually came to support me on the journey.
Yes.
Which
Yes.
is how I know that, which is what affirmed for me the understanding that the arc of a human life is about evolution. It's
Yeah.
about growing through our challenges. It's about refining ourselves into a greater order of beauty. It's about having the experience and letting it make us more integrated, more coherent, more beautiful as beings. And that when we do that, we're progressing. We're progressing the cultivation of creation itself. And that's not a selfish thing. It's not a grandiose thing to think. It's just like, okay, this is me. I'm here. This is what I get to do this time. This is what I teach my students and all the time and my clients. I'm just like, your path matters. Your soul matters. Your journey matters. What you care about, what's meaningful to you, what you're here to do, what you're here to be, what you've got to say, it all matters. It all matters. This is all creation. This is divine. The divine is not something out here that's looking down on us, dispensing blessings or withholding them. The divine is right here. This is it. Right here. Right here. This is it. Right here.
Yeah. Yes. Yes. um, That is so beautiful, and I can relate to what you're sharing in so many ways, on so many levels. It's like that when you said like I was at a point where, I thought about like it would be maybe better to not be here, to be dead, right? So that's such a tricky place, right? Where everyone has to travel if they're going to make this journey, is realizing the difference between the literal death and the metaphorical death, and how much courage it takes to be in the fire. Like literally you were in the fire. And that was the process of um, beginning to see that the path is available all around us. it's the wisdom is there waiting to lift us up, and it's not an easy journey, of course. And one thing about that story about Ishtar or Inanna, all of her beautiful names, the embodiment of the life principle known as Venus, and the ability to organize our life in a beautiful, like aesthetically pleasing expression of our soul, that we get to do that. And that when she was going under, to meet her dark sister, is that in this culture, as a product of our collective evolution, that underworld has been made into the hell realm, right? And any good person can know nothing about the hell realm by definition. And so half of our psyche has been removed, and we're like, why am I struggling? Why is it so hard? And it's just like, well, it's kind of hard to make a cake with half the recipe, Like I never knew cakes could be so yummy and fluffy because I didn't even know to put the eggs in, or the sugar, or the baking soda, or whatever you put into tasty cakes. But I was like, oh, wow, like that is an essential part of my evolution and growth, freedom to be.
It is.
Yeah. So
Absolutely.
thank you for telling that story. And the second part that I wanted to mention, that story is so powerful for me, is when the two little sprites are sent down, and it's because of their ability to offer Anana's sister empathy. Like that's my favorite line, is like when she's like, oh, the outside of my body hurts, and they're like, oh, the outside of your body hurts.
Yeah.
She's like, the inside of my body hurts, and they're like, the inside of your body hurts. Yeah. And it's through that mirroring and that reflection and that community, really, it's being in community, that she's able to release Anana back to the living.
Yeah.
And how we hold ourselves hostage, really, unknowingly.
Yeah, definitely. In the experience that I've gone through since parting with my now former beloved, I had an opportunity to spend a lot of time with my internal violence, and it was savage. And it was really interesting to experience that after so many years of deep work, and to really realize that there was a depth that I just hadn't touched. That everything that I had done up to that point was valid, and actually made space for me to be able to go that much farther and to reach that much deeper into the the the, the violence of the trauma inside of me. Because when we're going there, people get so afraid. I see this with my clients and my students all the time. They get so afraid of what they are experiencing in themselves when they really go all the way. This definitely happens in the entheogenic work, but it definitely happens also just in the regular counseling, because I do deep dive counseling with people, and the deeper our relationships get, the farther we go into these materials. And when they go through whatever rupture or upheaval in their life that happens while we're working together, which is not to say that it will, but it just often
Yeah.
does. Because
Yeah.
once you start down the path, life is like, oh, you're going there. Great, let's go there.
Mm-hmm.
So once these scabs start to get torn off, once you take the lids off the boxes, once you take the lids off the crypts, and you start to really see what's been repressed and rejected and denied in there, and how that has distorted and gone monstrous because of the rejection and because of the abandonment that we bring to ourselves, on top of everything that the world brings to us from the external, it can be terrifying. But actually, if you are willing to sit in the intensity of what you meet there and just keep breathing and just stay with it without spinning off into narrative or collapsing into despair or activating into fight or freezing or something like this, if you can actually just sit in the midst of the intensity and become the eye of that storm, there's a deeply magical process of revelation that happens where you will reliably find a fragment of your own soul that is desperate to come home, just desperate to come home. And when you make contact with that through all of the chaos of the demons and the madness and whatever else is built up around it, when you make contact with that fragmented part of the self that is desperate to come home, you can wrap your own love around it and start to bring it home. And start to make yourself whole in that way and progress your evolution in that way.
Yes, and it's such a precious process that only one can do for themselves with themselves. And it's like when you were speaking of that, it's just like bringing a little facet of your own light, right? That had been lost, had been hidden, had been covered over,
Yeah.
and the piece of what you were saying is that a lot of times this work that you've been called to do, and that I've been called to do, and that many people have been called to do, this integrating the self, is, you know, from seen from the outside, could be considered self-involved, self-focused, and I think it's so important that you mentioned that this is the work of divinity. This is the work of remembering the self. This is the reintegration of consciousness itself through the individual, which is the divine. And so this is deeply important in regards to the evolution of consciousness itself. And so that I can't think of a better work to do myself personally and to be able to guide others on their journey, to have that faith and have that courage and that trust. Like, I've been there, like I've been in the eye of the storm and I sat with it, and it's beautiful. It looks super scary and it's dressed up as a monster, but it's actually you, a piece of your own consciousness, just like Anana's sister, her dark sister, which was actually her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The
And
rest
so,
of it.
yeah.
Yeah.
That
Well, there's also a piece too of nesting the healing of the self and the evolutionary arc of the soul, the personal soul, into the broader process of the world.
Yes.
Because as we know, with a lot of psychotherapy and a lot of new age practices, a lot of medicine work, a lot of all the things, it's very easy to get lost in the endlessness of the
Yes.
inner journey and the seeming bottomlessness of healing and integration and all these other things. So depending on where a student or a client comes from when they arrive to me, we don't my intent as a teacher, my intent as a counselor and a guide and a mentor is not to continually drive someone into themselves, but to help them cultivate their coherence to such a degree that they can participate in the slings and arrows of daily life from a place of integration. And it's
Yes.
not like participating gets put off until you're integrated. There are times when you need to say, okay, life, world, I'm going to take care of the basics, but everybody stay out there. I'm closed. I'm doing things in here. There
Yeah.
are times when that's really crucial. But there's a time also when it's really important to say, okay, now it's time to bring this out. Now it's time to offer this. All of this work needs to become, in whatever way is natural to the individual soul, all of this working on the self needs to become a gift, a resource to the world in some way. It's not just about how you sit in here and navigate and work on your trauma or work on your whatever. You do that so that you can participate in a more beautiful way, because there are so many people who don't have that luxury, who don't have that resource, who don't have that time or that space or those tools, who don't know. And we're all here together. So once you're sufficiently grounded in here to be able to participate at an integrated level, then you go forth and you participate. That's the point. It's
Yeah.
not it's not about just being in here, I'm going to heal me and the rest of the world can, like, best of luck. It's
Yeah.
like, I'm going to come in here, I'm going to do my part
Yeah.
so that I can participate in a greater way, so that I can move us all along to the best of my ability, and in the most beautiful way I can while I'm here.
Yeah. I think that's super important as well, because I totally agree, right? That people get stuck in this internal labyrinth and they can't get out, or they forget they forget that there's, a
There is an out.
purpose. Yeah. That there's a purpose to this work,
Yeah.
and that it is to, also be able to enjoy this gift and this delight of life, and the magic and the miracles, um, and how often, right, that is being in a community or in a tribe, um, and then just also getting really clear, like there's, a lot of wounds still around belonging and inclusion, and the right to to be embodied in your own, space of your mind and your heart. Um, yeah. So it's a miraculous journey. It's very nuanced, and it's important to have. Well, it's a luxury and a gift to have a guide that can accompany you
Yeah.
in a way that works for you.
Yeah.
So I see we're just coming up upon an hour, and I just want to let all the listeners know that I'm going to include all of your contact information and your website in the description of this podcast if people want to find out more about the work that you do, or they want to get in touch with you.
Yeah.
And I could talk with you for hours, and
Yeah.
hopefully we'll have an opportunity to do that. Sometimes I like to do part 2 of
Okay.
my guests, so definitely I will see if we can create another opportunity for that, because I feel like we're just beginning.
We're just
So um, so I want to thank you for being here and sharing your heart and your wisdom and your magic and your medicine. It's been a true gift, and I know all of the listeners will benefit from what you shared here today. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Adrienne. It's been such a treat to talk with you this morning.